Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health says there have been 5 hospitalizations linked to a nationwide recall of non-dairy milks. A wide variety of Silk and Great Value brand drinks have been recalled over concerns of Listeria contamination. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency is telling people to throw out the drinks, and doctors are warning people at high risk for listeriosis to be especially careful they don't consume any of the recalled products. Symptoms include nausea and vomiting, and severe listeriosis can lead to meningitis. To help us understand Listeria better, I want to bring in microbiologist and infectious diseases specialist Dr. Vanessa Allen. She is with the Sinai Health and the University Health Network in Toronto. She's also an adjunct scientist for Public Health Ontario. Doctor, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks very much for the invitation.
So we know that there are 9 cases of Listeria in Ontario, including 5 that have led to hospitalization. How concerning is that?
We take Listeria very seriously. These individuals who are affected have infection that involves their bloodstream or their CNS, so they have meningitis, as you described, and really we take it quite seriously. I think all of this effort to let people know that the product has Listeria in it and that people should take it, check in their fridge to see if they have it, take it off their shelf, and make sure they're not affected is the most important. Just as a background, it's important to know that Listeria, for the most part, people can ingest it. And in fact, it's found in the soil, it can be found in the water. They ingest it and nothing happens. So you eat it and there's no symptoms. In rare cases, when there's a very high concentration, people can get diarrhea, they can get vomiting. But as you described, for those who are at higher risk, they can get more severe infection. And that's why the flags are raised in this case, is that there were 9 individuals that had this more serious form.
So tell us a bit more about Listeria itself. What it is. I mean, you talked a little bit about where it can come from, but what sort of raises that possibility that there could be more Listeria in a product than, would be manageable for someone to ingest? Yeah,
that's a really important question. The one specific, so it's a bacteria. It's a very common bacteria that's found in all sorts of environments. It likes to hide in biofilms, so in manufacturing companies, it actually can be found in sort of any area where it's not easily cleaned. But the same is true for produce, so lettuce it's been found on, for example. The unique characteristic about Listeria is that it grows actually at cold temperatures. Most bacteria don't grow at cold temperatures, and this makes it so that ready-to-eat food in particular is at high risk of contamination. So the classic teaching to kind of be wary of unpasteurized cheeses is the classic example, because those foods are not, first of all, pasteurized, and then they're not reheated. But other ready-to-eat foods have been really good examples. So cold cuts, smoked fish that's refrigerated and not canned. It's been identified with different kinds of lettuce. So anything where there's no further reheating step is vulnerable to this bacteria colonizing that food. And if people ingest it then without cooking it, and they're particularly vulnerable, then they can get either the gastroenteritis or diarrhea or the more severe infection. The people who are at risk for the really severe forms are in three groups. So the first group is those who are over 65, who have some of them have slightly less robust immune systems, and they can be particularly vulnerable to the more severe forms of listeriosis. The second group is pregnant women. Fortunately, pregnant women can develop more serious forms of listeria. And then lastly, those who are immunocompromised, so individuals who have had organ transplants, bone marrow transplants, or who are on other drugs that cause their immune systems to be depressed.
I've got a couple of viewer questions questions that I wanted to pose to you here, and one of them includes someone in one of those vulnerable groups here. So let's start off with this one. What should people do if they drank some of this recalled milk, especially vulnerable people like those who might be pregnant? So if they're in one of those categories and they know that one of their cartons was on this list, what should they be doing?
It's a great question. So the first thing is just to make sure that if they consume that they get rid of the product. So that would be the first step, both for them and any people that may also consume it at home. The second part is to watch for symptoms. And the symptoms you described earlier, but just to repeat some of them. So diarrhea or vomiting, fever, muscle aches, and then headaches or other either visual changes or sort of overall neurological symptoms. So if something, really bad headache is the classic example, or a stiff neck, those are the symptoms to watch out for. In the absence of symptoms, even if you, consume
no problem. The technology of TV there.
Sorry.
The reality of it. Yeah, all good.
So even if a person in the vulnerable group had the product, it's the likelihood of getting a serious infection is still very low. So likely there's no real test to do if there's no symptoms. But if there are symptoms or if there's questions, one can always go to their provider and ask about what can be done. If there are symptoms, there's blood tests that can be done. They're basically trying to look for the bacteria itself in blood cultures or in the spinal fluid if there's any headache or neurological symptoms. So it's only in those cases usually that any testing is performed. But the bottom line is just to watch out for those symptoms. In the absence of those symptoms, the likelihood of infection is very low, and there's nothing really to be done, but one can always discuss that with your provider.
We've got one more quick question for you here from one of our viewers, so let's go to that. How soon after drinking would you get sick? And we don't have much time here, doctor, but timing-wise, what do you think? Yeah,
so the range, so for gastrointestinal symptoms, it's usually between 2 and 10 days. The more severe infections where it gets invasive, it actually can be quite long. It can be as long as 70 days, so over 2 months. And that's another unfortunate and unique feature of this particular infection.
Okay, doctor, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. That's Dr. Vanessa Allen. She's a microbiologist and infectious diseases specialist.